Somewhere in your house there is a Bible, and on its first page are 4 English words you have read so many times they have gone invisible. In the beginning. 4 words in English. In the original Hebrew, 1. A single word. 6 letters. It has been sitting on the first page your whole life, quietly holding more than the English can carry. And that one word does not say quite what you think it says. Stay with me, and I can promise you this: by the end of this hour, you will never read the first page of the Bible the same way again. Come look at it with me. The word is bereshit. That is the whole of in the beginning, one word, spoken in a breath. And before we open the word itself, I want you to see something strange about its very first letter. Something readers noticed at least 2,000 years ago and have never stopped turning over since. Picture a scribe. In Jewish tradition, a Torah scroll is still written the way it was written 20 centuries ago, by hand, by a trained scribe called a sofer, working with a feather quill and ink on parchment, in silence, letter by letter. If a single letter is malformed, the scroll cannot be used. And the Talmud preserves a remarkable detail about the earliest of these scholars. They were called soferim, which means, literally, the counters, because they counted every letter of the scriptures. Not every book, not every verse, not every word, every letter, so that not one could ever be lost. Now watch what a counter of letters notices on page 1. The Hebrew alphabet begins with the letter Aleph. Every Hebrew child learns it first the way our children learn A. Aleph, then Bet, then Gimel. The alphabet, the word alphabet itself, descends from it. Aleph is the head of the line, the first of the letters. But the Torah, this book that sets out to describe the absolute start of everything, does not begin with Aleph. It begins with Bet. The second letter, the opening letter of bereshit, drawn oversized in many Torah scrolls, larger than every other letter on the page, as if the scribes wanted to make sure you would stop and look at it. The story of all beginnings skips the first letter of the alphabet. If that seems like a small thing, I can tell you the ancient rabbis did not think it was small. In Genesis Rabbah, a collection of commentary compiled over 1,500 years ago from traditions older still, they stop at this letter and ask the question out loud: why does the Torah begin with a bet? And their answers are some of the most beautiful things I know. Here is the first one. Look at the letter's shape. Bet is drawn like a small enclosure, a line above, a line below, a line closing off the back. 3 sides sealed, 1 side open. And because Hebrew reads from right to left, the sealed side faces backward and the open side faces forward, into the sentence, into the scroll, into the story about to be told. The rabbis read that shape like a map. What lies behind creation, they said, before it, above it, beneath it, is closed to us. Sealed. Not ours to know. The letter itself shuts those doors. But the 4th side stands open, and it opens in one direction only, forward, toward the story that is coming to meet you. The first letter of the Bible is a doorway that only opens one way. And there is more, because the letter's own name is part of it. Bet is a form of the Hebrew word bayit, house. In the oldest picture writing this letter descends from, Bet was literally a little drawing of a house, a floor plan with an opening for a door. So the whole of creation begins inside a letter shaped like a shelter with one wall open. The world, says the very first mark of ink on the page, is a house, built, enclosed, protected, and open toward whatever comes next. The rabbis noticed one thing more. Bet is the first letter of barakah, the Hebrew word for blessing. Aleph, they observed, begins the word for curse. And so they said, God chose to open the world with the letter of blessing. And then, I love this, they turned tender toward the letter that was passed over. In the old telling, Aleph grieves. It is the first of all letters, and it was not chosen. So God consoles it with a promise: wait. When I give the 10 Commandments at Sinai, I will begin with you. And so it is. The commandments open with the word Anoki, I am the Lord your God, and Anoki begins with Aleph. The letter that was silent at creation waits a whole age, and then stands at the front of the sentence where God says I, And it fits, somehow, that Aleph is the quietest letter in the alphabet. It has almost no sound of its own, just the soft opening of the mouth before a vowel. The alphabet begins with something very close to silence. And the silence waited its turn. Now you can hold those old answers loosely. The rabbis offered them as poetry more than proof, and so do I. But feel the weight underneath them, because that is the real revelation here. This text has been read that closely. Letter by letter, shape by shape, for more than 2,000 years, people have pressed their ear against the first page like a listener at a wall, convinced that even the ink had something to say. And that was only the first letter. I'm the lamp hour, by the way. This channel takes one old line from the Psalms, "Your word is a lamp to my feet," and holds that lamp over the original words of Scripture, one word at a time. Tonight, the very first one. Stay with me, because inside the whole word there is something missing, something every English Bible quietly fills in. And that gap is the reason one of the greatest Bible readers of the Middle Ages looked at this verse and said it cries out, "Interpret me." Let's open the word. Bereshit comes apart in your hands into two pieces. The first piece is that opening letter, bet, doing double duty. Because in Hebrew, a single letter fastened to the front of a word can be a whole preposition. This one means in. The second piece is the word reshit, beginning first part, first portion. And reshit itself is grown from a root you will want to remember because it will come back before we are done. Rosh, the Hebrew word for head. So bereshit, rendered woodenly, is in beginning, or even more literally, at the head of things. And now the gap. Hebrew has a word for the. It is a little prefix, and when it melts together with the letter that means in, the vowel changes. The word's own sound tells you the article is there. Hebrew is perfectly capable of saying in the beginning. That word would sound different. And the word on the first page of the Bible is not that word. The text does not say in the beginning, it says in beginning, unencored. Hanging in the air. English translators are not doing anything underhanded when they supply the "the." English simply cannot leave that slot empty. The sentence would collapse. But Hebrew can leave it empty. And Hebrew does. The first word of the Bible arrives with a small, deliberate openness right in the middle of it. And the moment you see it, you cannot unsee it. So what is that openness doing there? Why does the first word of Scripture hover like that? Enter Rashi. He lived in the 11th century, in Troyes, in the wine country of northern France, a rabbi whose commentary became so beloved that for 900 years it has been printed on the page as the Hebrew text itself, wrapped around Scripture like a voice murmuring in the margin. And in his very first note on the Bible, Rashi says this verse demands interpretation. In his words it says, "Darsheni, interpret me." Here is what he noticed. Everywhere else in Scripture, this word reshit leans on the word that follows it. Grammarians call the pattern the construct state, but you don't need the term, you can hear it. Reshit is always the beginning of something. The beginning of the reign of a king. The first of the harvest. The first of a man's strength. Reshit is a word that reaches forward and takes the next word's hand. So Rashi read it that way here too. Not in the beginning God created, full stop, a sealed announcement. But in the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth, when the earth was wild and waste and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the breath of God hovered over the waters, God said, "Let there be light." Feel what just changed. In the reading most of us grew up with, verse 1 is a date stamp, an absolute origin. The door of existence swings open on nothing, and the very first fact is a finished act. God created. Everything else follows from it. In Rashi's reading, verse 1 does not stand alone. It leans. It is the opening of a long breath that doesn't land until verse 3. Creation is described mid-motion. You arrive and the camera is already rolling. Dark water. Wind over the surface. A formless deep the Hebrew calls tu vavohu. Say it aloud and you can hear the emptiness echo inside it. And then, into all of that, the first complete sentence, the first finished act of the whole Bible. Let there be light. In one reading, the first thing that happens is heavens and earth. In the other, the first thing that happens, the first thing that is allowed to stand as a whole act is light. Now let me be honest with you, because this word deserves honesty, and because the honesty is where the wonder lives. Rashi's reading is old and serious, and he did not hold it alone. Abraham ibn Ezra, the great Spanish commentator a generation or two later, came to a similar conclusion by his own road. And in our own time, several respected translations have moved this way. You can now open a Bible whose first line reads, "When God began to create the heavens and the earth." But the traditional reading, "In the beginning God created," is older still, and it has serious defenders too. More than 2 centuries before Jesus, Jewish translators in Alexandria rendered this verse into Greek, and they heard it as an absolute statement, a true beginning, a wall at the back of time. The ancient system of accent marks that scribes attached to every word of the text points the same way. And the grammarians on this side observe that Hebrew often drops the article from expressions of time standing at the head of a sentence, at first, from of old, so in the beginning may be precisely what the writer meant, article or no article. So which is it? A wall or a current? An absolute origin or a story joined mid-motion? Here is the honest answer. The letters on the page hold both. The vowel marks that tip the scale were added by the Masoretes, families of scribes working near the Sea of Galilee, roughly between the 6th and 10th centuries, guardians of the text who preserved how it had been chanted for ages. But the oldest layer, the bare consonants themselves, sits open-handed. Read them one way, and you hear the door of existence slam open on nothing. Read them the other way, and you hear a voice speaking light into waters that are already dark and restless. Many scholars read it one way. Others hear the other. I will not pretend to close a conversation that 1,000 years of brilliant readers have deliberately kept open. What I want you to hear is the thing they all agree on without saying it. This word is deep enough that you can argue about it for a millennium and never touch bottom. And we still have not asked the most beautiful question about it. Because beginning may be the palest thing reshit means. To hear this word the way a farmer in ancient Israel heard it, you have to leave the scholar's desk entirely and go stand in a barley field in early spring. In the book of Leviticus, God gives Israel a law about harvest. When you enter the land and reap its grain, you do not simply gather it in. First, before you have tasted a single kernel, you cut one sheaf, the first sheaf, and you bring it to the priest, who lifts it up before the Lord. The text names that sheaf with our word. It is the reshit of your harvest. Stop and picture what that actually asks of a farmer. The rest of the field is still standing. Anything could still happen to it: hail, locusts, a late storm flattening a year's work in an hour. You do not yet know whether there will be a harvest. And the law says, take the first of it, the earliest and best of it, and give that part away first. Not the leftovers in autumn. The first sheaf in trust, while everything is still uncertain. That is what reshit means out in the world. Not merely the part that comes first in time, the first and best portion. The portion you offer before you know how the story ends. And in the logic of the harvest law, that one sheaf does something to all the rest. The offered part consecrates the whole. The single armful of barley, lifted up, carries the entire field with it. Deuteronomy paints the scene even more tenderly, the worshiper walking to the sanctuary with a basket of firstfruits in his arms, the reshit of all the fruit of the ground. And the prophet Jeremiah reaches for the same word when God speaks of his people with something like ache in the sentence. Israel was holy to the Lord, the reshit of his harvest. Now carry all of that back to page 1. In the reshit, God created the heavens and the earth. Readers ancient and modern have heard the harvest humming underneath that sentence. The beginning not as a timestamp but as a first sheaf, the first portion of time itself lifted up. The opening act that somehow carries everything after it, the way one armful of barley carries a field. The ancient rabbis even played the word this way outright. Since that opening bet can also mean for the sake of, they read bereshit as for the sake of the reshit, the world created for the sake of everything Scripture calls a first portion. It is wordplay, and they knew it was wordplay. But it is wordplay in the direction the word already leans. And now watch reshit walk out of the field and into the wisdom books, because there it does something stranger still. It stops being about time altogether. There is a line you have probably heard even if you have never opened a Bible. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It is in the Psalms, its cousins are in Proverbs. And the word translated beginning is our word. The fear of the Lord, that awed, steadied reverence before what is greater than you, is the reshit of wisdom. For years I heard that as lesson 1. Step 1 on a staircase you eventually leave behind, the way you leave the alphabet behind once you can read. But that is not what a reshit is. The first sheaf is not a stage the harvest outgrows, it is the portion that consecrates all the rest. The reshit of wisdom is not wisdom's on-ramp. It is wisdom's headspring, the source the river never stops drawing from, no matter how far it flows. You never graduate from a reshit. You are carried by it. Proverbs presses the word even further. In its 8th chapter, wisdom herself is given a voice, and she sings about her own origin. The Lord possessed me, the reshit of his way, before his works of old, before the deeps, before the mountains, when he marked out the foundations of the earth, I was there. Wisdom is the first sheaf of God's own way. Hold on to that verse. It is going to open a door in a moment. But first, notice that underneath every meaning we have touched, first in time, first in rank, first in best portion, one small anatomical word has been doing the work all along. Rosh, head. Reshit is the head word, what stands at the head. Hebrew still says it this way: the Jewish New Year is called Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year. And Scripture uses Rosh for the head of a mountain, the head of a column of smoke, the chief of a family. First things in this language are not points on a timeline. They are the head of a living body, the part the rest follows. And here is a small marvel that I have never gotten over. One page after Bereshit, in the 2nd chapter of Genesis, a river flows out of Eden to water the garden, and then it divides. The text says it becomes 4 rashim, 4 heads. Headwaters. The Bible's own 2nd page uses the root of its first word to describe the sources of rivers. So let the 2 pages read each other. Bereshit, at the head of things, at the headwaters. Creation not as a distant ignition point, but as the spring at the head of the river, and every later page, every psalm and prophet and genealogy and song is water downstream of it. Downstream water tastes of its source. That is why the counters counted. That is why the rabbis pressed their ear to the ink. Now come forward in time a long way. Late in the 1st century, an old man sits down to write, by long tradition in Ephesus, a Greek-speaking city on the coast of Asia Minor. He is Jewish. He has spent his whole life inside the scriptures we have been reading tonight. He knows the Greek translation of Genesis the way you know the opening bars of a song from your childhood. And he is about to write an account of Jesus of Nazareth. He needs a first line. And this is the one he chooses on Arshan Ho Logos. In the beginning was the Word. That opening is not generic. It is the Greek Genesis, note for note, the exact phrase every synagogue-taught reader of his world had inside them like a bell. Beginning a book that way meant one thing, and it was unmissable, the way it was the best of times or call me Ishmael is unmissable to us. John is laying his first page directly over the Torah's first page, tracing its letters. He is deliberately reopening the Bible's first word, walking his reader back to the headwaters and saying, "Look again." And many readers for 2,000 years have heard Proverbs 8 standing quietly in the room while he writes, wisdom the reshit of God's way, present before the works of old, and have heard John saying, that presence at the beginning has now been seen and heard and touched. However far you follow him, this much is simply on the page. A first-century writer knew that Genesis' first word was not finished saying things, that you could return to Bereshit and find it still open, still flowing, which leaves the question this whole hour has been walking toward. The skipped letter, the missing article, the first sheaf, the headwaters, the echo on another first page. What do you actually do with all of that? On an ordinary Tuesday in English, at your kitchen table, with the same Bible that has been on the shelf for years. More than you might think. Because the Bible's first word is quietly teaching you how to read the rest of the book. Think about everything we found tonight and notice, none of it was hidden. It was all sitting in plain sight, in the most read sentence in the most read book on earth. It only needed someone to stop walking and hold the light still. The scribes who counted letters were not doing arithmetic for its own sake. They counted because they were convinced that in this text, nothing is filler. That under every plain word the floor goes deeper, that beginning and light and rest and bread and way are each trap doors standing open over wells. Your English Bible is not hiding these things from you. A good translation is a faithful thing, and the people who made yours labored in love. But a translation is like a pressed flower. It is truly the flower, and the original has soil and stem and season. Somebody should tell you the flower had weather. That is all this channel is for. And here is the part I most want you to take with you. What the rabbis and the scribes had, you can have. It was never primarily the language. It was the pace. There is a reason this channel is named from the line in Psalm 119, "Your word is a lamp to my feet, a light to my path." Notice what a lamp is not. A lamp in the world that wrote that line was a palmful of clay and a wick, and it lit about one step of road at a time. Not a floodlight. Not the whole highway to the horizon. Light enough for the next step, and then when you take it, the next. That is not only a picture of guidance. It is a picture of how this book asks to be read. Not scanned under a floodlight, a chapter a minute, the way we read everything else all day. Walked by lamplight. One word held still until it warms. You have seen a Bible that was read this way, an old one, the leather gone soft, the margins full of pencil, certain pages nearly transparent from being touched. Whoever owned it was not reading fast. They were reading at lamp pace. And tonight you and I read one single word at that pace, and look how much was waiting inside it. So that is the first gift of bereshit. It teaches you the speed of the book it opens. But I think it whispers one thing more, and I want to say it carefully, because it is gentle and I do not want to bend it into a sermon. Consider what the Bible's first beginning is actually like. In the reading Rashi heard, the one many scholars hear with him, it does not arrive tidy. The page is still wet with tuhu vavohu, wild and waste, dark water and restless wind when the light is spoken. The beginning is offered mid-motion, unfinished. In that hearing, Scripture's first beginning looks less like a ribbon cutting and more like a first move made in the dark, which may be worth remembering in a season when some beginning of yours refuses to look ceremonial. And consider what the word itself carries from the barley field. A reshit is a first portion given in trust, the sheaf cut and lifted while the whole field still stands exposed to the sky, before anyone knows how the harvest will come out. Beginnings, in this book's first word, do not come with endings attached. They are small, early, offered before the outcome is known, and they carry more than their size. The first armful somehow holds the field. If you are standing at a beginning of your own right now, a marriage, a move, a diagnosis, a slow repair of something that broke years ago, I am not going to tell you it will all come in. The first word of the Bible does not say that either. It says something quieter and I think sturdier, that this is how beginnings are made in the world this book describes. Mid-motion. Unfinished. First portions given in trust. And the letter, remember the letter. 3 sides sealed, 1 side open. Closed toward what is behind and above and beneath, open in exactly one direction, forward into the story. I do not know a better drawing of what it feels like to stand at a beginning. You do not get the view from above. You do not get back what is behind. You get a shelter with one wall open and the opening faces the road. The whole first word of the Bible fits in a breath. And inside it, tonight, we found a skipped letter shaped like an open house, a missing thee that has kept a 1,000-year conversation alive, a sheaf of barley lifted over a standing field, the headwaters of every page that follows, and an old man in Ephesus tracing the word again like a letter over a letter. All of that under 4 English words you stopped seeing years ago. So here is where I set the lamp down for tonight, and I would genuinely like your help with where it goes next. This channel holds the light over one original word at a time. Which word should it be? The Hebrew word behind peace, which means far more than quiet. The word translated soul, which may not mean what we have all assumed. The stubborn, beautiful word for God's covenant love that English has never once managed to carry in a single word. Tell me in the comments. I read them, and I will follow the lamp where you point it. If an hour like this is the kind of slow you have been looking for, stay close. There is a lamp lit here every week. And until then, may the first page never go invisible on you again. And may every beginning you are standing in, however dark the water, however unfinished it looks tonight, turn out to be a reshit, a first portion, given in trust, carrying more than you can see. Good night.